Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Dr. Gaia Grant. She's a researcher into innovation leadership topics. She's the director of Tirian Consulting, and she's been working with some of the world's largest organizations for over 25 years to improve their innovation leadership and innovation culture capabilities. Dr. Grant, it's wonderful having you here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So for people who aren't aware of you or your work, could you just give us a brief background as to your journey around innovation?
Sure. So I think I started in innovation quite a while before it became trendy. So I was really interested, first of all, in creative thinking, how to develop creative thinking capabilities. And then I was interested in the leadership styles and leadership behaviours that can support creative thinking and innovation in an organisation. And then that developed into how do you create a culture that supports innovation. So I've been doing this for more than 15 years. And it originally started with a number of workshops with corporate clients that I work with internationally. And then I went much deeper into the research behind those leadership capabilities and the sort of culture that you need to create to support innovation. So it's been sort of a long-term passion that I've gone deeper and deeper into, but always because I work, as well as the research work, I work with clients and I have worked all the way through with clients. So I'm always grounding that research and always looking into how I can apply the principles that have emerged through the research.
And you know, research is one of my favorite words when it comes to innovation and creativity. So I think let's talk about one of those pieces of research today. You and I had a quick chat beforehand, and you yourself have done some research recently about ambidextrous innovation. What was behind that? What was the research and what did you find?
Sure. So I started the research with interviews with global innovation leaders. So these were people who were very successful in leading for innovation in highly innovative organisations. So I collected over 70 interviews, in-depth interviews, and I became fascinated by the language that these innovation leaders used. In fact, they embraced this sort of ambidexterity. They embraced ambiguities and they talked in paradoxes. So as an example, I had an innovation leader from KPMG talk about how you needed to be highly independent to be innovative, but at the same time, you also needed to be collaborative. And I thought that was interesting. It was in the same sentence, he talked about that. Others talked about how you need to be very flexible, but you also need to develop systems and structures that will support innovation over the long term. So I looked into these paradoxes and realized, you know, the overarching concept was that you need to be exploratory, you need to be pushing for breakthrough innovations at the same time as simultaneously building these systems and structures incrementally that would support sustainable innovation over the long term. So it's sort of like mathematicians who can rapidly switch between both sides of the brain. They have the capability of being very highly logical, they're very disciplined, but they also can think creatively from those foundations and they can stretch themselves. You have jazz musicians and ballet dancers who can do the same thing. So innovation leaders, I discovered, were ambidextrous thinkers. And their cognition was just automatically capable of embracing what seems like two very different polar positions. And usually you think in terms of those being, you know, either or, you have one or the other. But these thinkers were able to think of them in terms of both and. You have to have both. And that's the only way to have sustainable innovation. So that's how the journey started. And as I analysed the interviews, I went deeper and found that there was a number of different dimensions, which I called nested dimensions, of these paradox pairs within those overarching exploration preservation concepts. And so I unpacked those, and from there I developed a measure. And measure was designed to help people to identify what their own basic orientation is, because most of us will have a preference towards exploration or towards preservation. And even the most simple of amoeba and the most simple life forms either move towards or away from danger. And as humans, we're the same. We have a certain preference. And once you've identified that preference, then I looked at, what are the behavior dimensions within that? How is that expressed in real life? And then I looked at, what does that mean in practice? And how can you start to learn to be aware of what your preferences are? And how can you start to stretch yourself where it's helpful to be able to stretch yourself as a leader? How can you build teams that are complementary and that bring those different capabilities and orientations to the room? And it just became a really fascinating study into how you can lead for innovation, how to become an ambidextrous leader, and then how to create a culture that supports innovation.
So the research came from the insights from these 70 highly effective innovators. How does that then apply to the wider population, the thousands or millions of managers out there in the world who might not be at the top echelon of performers yet?
Well, part of what emerged when I tested and validated the survey results, so after I'd done the innovation interviews, then I sent out thousands and thousands of surveys. And when I analysed those results, I found some significant profiles. So first of all, I found there was a significant innovation leader profile. And an innovation leader was very highly exploratory. So they definitely had a preference for exploration, but they had one dimension of preservation that was strong also, and they were ambidextrous in that dimension. And that was the one I mentioned earlier. They were both collaborative, highly collaborative, but also highly independent thinkers. So that's, what came out as a strong innovation leader profile. But as well as that, I came out with some other really interesting, significant profiles. So you had, for example, an executive leader who was all exploratory. And I thought that was fascinating because they have to think, in terms of big picture, strategic measures. They can't get bogged down in the details. And then on the other extreme, you had people working in finance who were very strong on all dimensions of preservation. So they liked the systems and the structures and the rules and the regulations, although they were also quite collaborative. And in between that, you had HR. But another profile I was really interested in was scientists. So scientists were the most ambidextrous overall. And when you think about that, they have to have that discipline around what they do, but they also have to be very creative thinkers to be able to extrapolate from the scientific results and come up with, different applications, real world applications. So that was one interesting way that I was able to start thinking about the people that I worked with. No matter what their role, no matter what their preferences, how could they understand those differences and work with them effectively? And if anyone wants to become more effective at innovation, then part of it is learning just to be aware of how to stretch themselves when needed. And I think that's what a lot of what being agile is about. It's looking at the rapid change context or the situation that you find yourself in, and you're saying, well, this situation requires that I be more flexible. So even if my preference is for stability, I'm really going to have to stretch myself for a bit, or I'm going to have to find people who are very flexible and rely on them and work with them and trust them. So there's many applications for every individual, depending on what they want for themselves, what they need in their job, in their role, in their life. And a lot of these principles have been applied in people's marriages and in their own personal lives. So these are general principles as well. But it's really learning how to stretch, how to move enough out of your comfort zone so that you're extending yourself while being aware of, what is my natural preference, what am I good at, and what are my strengths, and how can I build on those?
I'd be fascinated to hear from you what the relationship is between these individual preferences, and firstly, the way that this influences a portfolio of innovation within a company, and then also the teams that are required to execute on those portfolios, which are made up of different individuals. What sort of insights do you have around that?
So how to apply it in the organization? I actually have also developed a team measure. So what I can do is we can take a group or team results, or take individual results of team members, and then I can look at the stretch. So I can see if there are gaps. I can see if there is a wide enough stretch that you have people who are able to cover, I guess, all parts of the court or all sides of the road. And so that's really ideally what a team should be able to do. So the measure helps to provide that feedback on the overall team performance. And then we can look at, what are some ways that you might be able to stretch, or you might be able to apply yourselves. And we can look at how to teach some practical skills and strategies to help the team develop, and then come back and look at the results again later to see if there has been a change. When I conduct workshops on this, and I've developed a whole series of workshops which I think are highly effective in helping people to identify their own capabilities and the team capabilities, I have an exercise that I call dynamic polar positioning. And what it is it's saying, let's think of exploration and preservation as two sides of the road. And I'll give them a particular scenario that's relevant for their business or for their team. And I'll say, where would you position yourself, on which side of the road, and how far away from the center would you be? And I get them to think about too how there can be extremes. So people, innovators are often very proud, or entrepreneurs in particular, that they're very high risk takers and they're very exploratory. But think of that at the extreme. There's such a thing as too much risk. It's dangerous. There's such a thing as too much openness. You can have no clear direction. So, and that's what part of this ambidexterity is about. You have to hold that tension between the two sides. So if you have, let's say, openness is one of the dimensions I identified. Too much openness, there's no focus. So you need some focus. But then on the other side, too much focus can become insular. So you need some openness. So it's that tension between the two sides that needs to be maintained. And the idea is that I'll talk to a team about, a particular scenario that they're facing in their innovation program or in their organization. Where are they standing? Where do they think they need to be? How can they navigate the way to move forward successfully together? How can they reach alignment? What sort of language can they use with each other? How can they communicate with each other effectively? And we look at, how they can ensure that they're maintaining that tension, because the tension can be highly destructive. It can pull an individual apart, it can pull a team apart, it can pull an organization apart. But it can also be highly constructive, and it can fuel sustainable innovation if it's understood, if there's an awareness, if there's a respect for the differences, and if that tension is maintained as a positive force. So there's a lot of ways you can apply this, and sometimes I'll go in and look at a particular innovation program. I'll break it down, look at the steps, and we can talk about, what side of the road do you need to be on right now in your program? And you might need to be in exploratory phase. You might need to focus on ideation and looking for the breakthrough new ideas. But then typically you'll need to move into that preservation phase, where you'll need to start grounding those ideas. You'll need to start developing them. You'll need to start analysing them, prototyping them, implementing them. And there's this constant movement between those two positions. So you have to keep it as a dynamic process. It's not, here we are, we're just going to sit on this side of the road and keep driving ahead, because you've got to look to the future. You need to see what's on the horizon, what's going to change, how you need to keep shifting to adapt. Like a racing car driver will, pull out wide at times and then come in close to the corner and try to avoid skidding out over the edge. an organisation, a team needs to do the same thing. There are times to pull out wide and explore. There's times to come in tight, pull everything together. So you've got that, divergent thinking, that convergent thinking, constant shift between the two.
It's a very interesting concept. It's in some ways a little bit different from other views of a portfolio, where you'd have multiple projects, some of which are focused on exploration, some of which are focused on exploitation. In your case, sort of exploration and preservation. So some to improve the current product and some separate ones to develop slightly more transformative innovations. In that process, you'd have teams dedicated to doing either exploration or preservation. But you're saying sometimes it helps to have teams go through both phases for every project. Is that right?
Yeah, so you have something that's known as structural ambidexterity, where it's built into the structure of the organisation. So you can have your innovation team, and then you can have your finance team, and everybody's separate and performing their own functions, which is okay to a point because at least you're covering both sides of the road. But to really get that next level of ambidexterity in the organisation, then you're looking at contextual ambidexterity, which is where each individual is aware of and trained in, understanding the differences and able to think on the spot about, oh, okay, I need to now think in terms of exploration. I need to stretch my thinking a bit, or I need now to ground this idea and move forward with it. So that sort of contextual ambidexterity, if that's built into the DNA of the organisation and everybody is aware of those capabilities and the need to stretch themselves, then you'll have a very highly innovative and productive organisation. So there's, different ways to approach it, but I think that's where you're going to get those superior results.
Now, one final question. I always like to ask this from portfolio and ambidextrous experts. The devil's advocate question: are both exploration and exploitation completely equally important? Sometimes you see portfolios where there's 70% in exploitation, yes, 10% in exploration. So yes, what's your view on the balance between the two?
Look, absolutely. Both are equally important. We can't have a sustainable organisation without both. It's a matter of when do you apply each, because there's a time when you have to be open to exploring, and anyone who comes in with that analytical mind too quickly can crush an idea and stop that entrepreneurial spirit. But then for all entrepreneurs, if they just stay on that exploration trajectory, there comes a time when somebody's going to have to pull them back down to earth, and that those ideas need to be grounded. So as I said, there needs to be that respect. And just as an example, this is sort of a well-known example that most people can relate to, and that's Steve Jobs and Tim Cook. So you had the entrepreneur, Steve Jobs, who had these amazing ideas, very highly creative, very capable of taking the risks and stretching himself, creating interesting products. But the organisation was falling apart when it was under his leadership. So he needed to bring in Tim Cook to provide that counterbalance, somebody who was able to focus on those systems and those structures and to develop the supply chains and build the business itself, to provide that counterbalance and hold that tension between the two positions. So it's interesting now that Steve Jobs is out of the picture. Apple is certainly not innovating in their products as much as they were. Can they, sustain the organisation over the long term without being highly innovative in products? Remains to be seen.
Dr. Grant, it's been absolutely wonderful speaking with you. If people want to find out more about you, your work, your insights, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
Well, this particular material you'll find in the website the-innovation-race.com, and you can access the profile measure, the questionnaire there, if you'd like to try it out for yourself. You can go to, I have a speaker's website, you can go there. My name's spelled G-A-I-A-G-R-A-N-T. Look me up on LinkedIn, connect with me, please. I'd love to hear about what other people are doing, and I'd love, as a connector myself, I love connecting ideas and concepts and continuing to learn and build what I do. So Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I'll make sure to get all those links down in the description below. Dr. Grant, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.